Hello and welcome to Gardening at 58 North. So in this video I'm going to be waking up my hardy banana plants here. So please excuse the mess in the background. Basically I'm building a studio shed to help with my filming. At the moment it's only half complete, so that's why the whole garden looks like an absolute mess. But what I'm focusing on this video is the tropical bed here, which has the hardy bananas. Now these bananas are root hardy, so if they're well mulched they can handle quite hard frosts, but the problem is the stems themselves can only handle about -1, -2. We sometimes get -15 here. So what I've done last winter is I've covered them up with insulation to try and protect them, and we did actually have -6 last winter, so it wasn't too bad, but I think that protection was definitely needed. Now I did already uncover one just as an experiment to see how it would do. Hasn't really put on any growth. You can see it's kind of sitting there. To be honest, it's been quite cold until quite recently, so I think the ground is cold. And one of the problems with insulating with an extra thick mulch, although it's great in winter to stop the cold getting in, it also stops the warmth getting in springtime. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to uncover all these plants, and then I'm going to get some water from my hot water tap. I'll keep it around 40 degrees. I don't want to burn the plants, but it needs to be really warm. I'll then water each plant, probably a whole watering can, which for my watering can is about 6 litres, so I might do 1.5 for each one. Just want to get lots of warmth back into the soil, and that way that they'll start coming into growth a bit faster. Now I've actually been trying to keep the ground cold for now, because the problem is if they start growing too early, they start growing and pushing against the protection here, or they start growing up and they have new leaves that are fresh in May and April time, and then the leaves will get killed by the frost. It's the 2nd of May today, but we actually had a hard -2 frost last week, so we can certainly still get frost. But looking forward, this week looks quite warm. The long-term outlook doesn't look too bad either, and if we get a very light frost and I lose 1 leaf on each plant, it's not a big issue. So I'm actually going to uncover them now. It's a bit of a risk, but the thing is, if I leave it until June, when the risk of frost is gone, that's the whole month of good growth that I could have missed on, because although May can be quite cold, we can often get frost. The daytime temperatures are normally decent, around about 12 to 15 degrees, and with these kind of bananas, because they're not tropical bananas, they should be able to grow in those cooler conditions. So I've got 2 different types of bananas here. Basically there's 4 sikkimensis, which is these towers here, and this one here, and I'll put some photos up of what they looked like last summer. They did look really nice. These are just the plain green ones without the striping. I have got one in my parents' garden, which I didn't protect apart from mulch on the ground, because they only get about -3, -2 most winters, and that's actually resprouting already and looking quite good. And then the other one here is Musa basjoo, which is a much hardier type of banana, the one that most people think of as a hardy banana plant. This one, I just kind of covered it with dead sticks from, I think this was from Jerusalem artichokes, and it was mounded up about this high, but over winter it's rotted down and the wind has moved it. So it's kind of exposed it now, but you can see this is just starting to grow. Also down the bottom, the little pups that were starting to come out are just starting to sprout as well. So this looks like it survived no problem. And I've had a peek of some of the other ones. This one actually looks like it's starting to grow quite a lot and it's pushing against the top. This one I can't see inside because I've sealed it up so tight, and that one over there I can peek inside, but there's not any obvious signs of growth. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to uncover them and have a look at them and see how they're doing. But before I uncover the hardy bananas, I'd like to give you a quick update on my Ensete ventricosum bananas. So these aren't technically hardy. They can take quite low temperatures, and they don't mind growing cold temperatures because they're from mountainous areas of Ethiopia. So these can grow at temperatures quite low, but they still don't like any frost. And these really aren't as hardy as the other plants. They don't have that underground tuber like the other ones do, and with these ones it's all in the stem. Now there is a bit of a corm at the bottom. Now these aren't technically bananas, they're more known as false bananas. They're not in the Musa genus, they're in the Ensete genus, so they are a little bit different. They don't have pups or anything like that, but these grow much bigger, much larger plants, and they are actually better suited to my climate because they can handle the cold growing conditions. They don't need the hot summer, but these, as I say, do need protection over winter. So what I did with these last year is I planted them out in spring as seedlings. They grew absolutely huge by autumn, and come November time they were massive plants. I then had to cut them back and dry store them, and the way you do that is you cut off the leaves, cut off the roots, and you just keep the main part of the stem. Now the main part of the stem is full of water, so it doesn't technically dry out completely, but you want to keep it in dry conditions so it doesn't rot. And then a couple of months ago I then potted these up and brought them into growth. The first leaves that come out, they've either been cut off from because they were cut in half when I cut them back in autumn, or they kind of come out as stunted like this, a bit narrow and small. But now the roots are established on these, and I have checked, they've got a good root system starting to develop. This should start putting out some larger leaves. I'm going to start acclimatizing this to the outside now. This week is probably a perfect week for it. If you can have a really cloudy week, you can acclimatize your plants without hardening them off too much. So these have been in a really sunny location in my conservatory. But even with the conservatory, there's a bit of UV filtering through the polycarbonate plastic that makes up the roof. So these aren't fully acclimatized to UV yet, but we're going to have a really cloudy week this week with mild temperatures. So this is the perfect week for them to harden off. If I have a really hot sunny day that comes along or a cold night, I will take them back inside so they don't get a shock. But generally I'm just going to keep these outside now, and they should harden off naturally just with it being such a cloudy grey week. As you can see, it's going to be like this for the whole week, just kind of uniform grey cloudy weather conditions, which is perfect for hardening off plants like this. So I'll probably give you guys an update of these later on. They are infested with aphids, but that's not a huge problem. These aphids, they will get killed by beneficial insects like ladybirds and hoverflies, and if they don't, I can always wash them off the plants. So I'm expecting these to do quite well. But I'll go ahead now, I'll uncover the bananas and I'll see how many have survived the winter. I'm hoping for a 100% success rate because it was only -6 last winter, and I have also insulated them with about almost a foot of mulch, and then with the towers as well. So that's the bananas now uncovered. The bed's already starting to look a little bit nicer instead of having those big insulation towers. Still doesn't look like much though because of the time of year. There's a lot of tropicals in this bed. I'll show you some photos of what it did look like last summer, and they're just waiting to come up basically, so it will look really full by the end of summer. And if you want to subscribe, you can come and have a look later in the season when everything's up, and it's going to look really lush again. It's just that everything's dormant underground at the moment. So looking at the bananas, they're looking not too bad. They don't look great. This one, as I say, has started growing. You can see this new growth has pushed out here. This one feels quite firm. It's quite a thin stem. Now these are all seed grown Musa sikkimensis bananas, and each one did look slightly different to each other. So for example, that one down there is more of a dwarf one, and it's kind of got this kind of smaller, thicker stem. The one at my parents' garden is similar to that. These other ones are a little bit taller, and the leaves do look a bit different as well. So there's a bit of variation in the genetics, which is also good because it probably means they're going to grow slightly differently and be slightly different hardiness levels when it comes to winter. So this one seems to be the one that grows the fastest in spring, or at least the first to start to grow. Now that's a bit unusual because this is the shadiest spot. The further you go that way in the bed, the sunnier it is. So this is probably showing that it's genetics and not position that's made this one grow faster, or at least come out of dormancy quicker. It's also quite a tall, slender one. It looks pretty bad, but it is firm, so I'm quite happy with that one. As you can see inside the box, I did also fill it with mulch in case we had it really cold and it was killed down to this level. It will stop the frost penetrating into the root level. And looking further down, we have got a little bit of rot on the surface, but further down, if you see, if I scrape back this soft mushy layer, we've got some nice solid healthy growth underneath. So this one's looking pretty good. I'm quite happy with this. What I'm going to do with all of these, I'm going to rake this mulch down into the rest of the bed because it's really thick around the base. I don't want to damage the actual trunk too much, but this one's looking alright, and hopefully that will come into growth once I start to warm up the soil a bit more. Also, with removing some of the mulch, it gets rid of some of that insulation that will let the soil warm up a little bit faster in conjunction with adding the hot water. So this one here, this one doesn't look as good. You can see the top here has gone all mushy, so that's dead. But the actual main stem feels pretty good. The outer layer again has been killed by the frost, but the inner layer has survived. That's one of the things with these hardy bananas, is they can't handle frost, but what it is they have so many layers that are full of water on the outside. It's almost like a sacrificial layer. That gets killed by the frost and gets killed, but inside the actual important growing point is protected. So if I pull this back, you can see there's a lot of fluid, but we've actually got some firmer material in there. So this leaf is dead as well, but further down, I think that should be okay. This is one of the worst out of the lot, but it definitely feels firmer inside. So this should hopefully be okay as well. If I check further down, again, very soft, but then after one layer of leaf, it's solid, undamaged material. A little bit of damage on the left there, but generally healthy. So that should come through okay with most of the stem intact. As this dries out now that it's in the open, I should find that this stiffens up, and this kind of soft, dead material, stuff that isn't really rotten, will actually get a bit crispier and add a bit of protection for it. This one here, again, it looks really bad, but it's actually firm even at the top. So if I peel this back, I suspect that there will be a healthy growing point in there somewhere. So looking down, you can see there we are. You can see how far the frost has gone, and then we got a healthy leaf at that point there. So this top half of the leaf is probably dead, but we got some healthier growth down there. Looking down here, this is one that's particularly deep with the mulch. You can actually see a lot of the mycorrhizal fungi down there. I did scatter this whole bed with mycorrhizal fungi, so that will be helping the plants, because the mycorrhizal fungi helps break down the organic content and links in with the roots. Now this one here is one of the ones that started to put up some little pups. You can see one down here. Fortunately, most of that pup seems to have gone to mush, but I'm hoping further down that pup's alright, and that should come up. There is a little bit of kind of bright green right in the middle of the pup there, so hopefully that will come through okay. You can just see at that point. So this one's not too bad. It's really solid stem, actually more solid than the rest. So out of them all, this one is probably the one that has survived winter the best with the least amount of damage. And then this one over here is the one that I'd uncovered previously. The other ones will look like this soon, where the outer layers dry up and it becomes a little bit more stable. But this one feels good, nice and solid. It has pushed out a little bit of growth at the top. The top growth is actually dead, but further down it's alive, and the alive stuff is pushing out the top. So once that's warmed up again, this should shoot off. And then coming over to the Musa basjoo, the most hardy of the lot. This here, you can see it's got 3 pups. The pups are actually looking pretty good. You can see there's some green coming through. Same with that there. So it definitely does seem to be hardier than the sikkimensis, and that is what all the books say. So this is the Musa basjoo, new growth coming through. A lot of the old stem dying off, but look, you can see there's nice healthy leaves starting to come out. And we've got the 3 pups there, and the 3 pups all look nice and sturdy. Although they're looking blackened, there's new growth coming through. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to just rake over the bed. The places where there's loads of leaves, that's some insulation for the hardy gingers, the Hedychiums gingers that I've got there, or Hedychiums, different ways of pronouncing it. I'm going to rake that up, and I'm just going to more evenly distribute the mulch to make sure that the soil can heat up a bit better. And then we've also got my tree dahlia here, known as Dahlia imperialis. This was massive, probably about 3 meters tall last year. This trunk is absolutely solid as well. Because we had a lot of wind, it kind of strengthened up, so you can see at the base there, it's huge. I'm 6'5", so my hands are actually quite large, so for comparison it probably doesn't look that big, but it is an absolute monster trunk. Unfortunately, the whole trunk seems to have died, even though it was mulched to about this height here. And covered it a few weeks ago, just try and get a bit of heat back into the ground, but there's absolutely no sign of growth. This did grow really fast last year, even in cooler temperatures, so I'm hoping this has survived. If it hasn't, I have got some cuttings inside that I took just in case this wouldn't survive, but it feels really solid, so I'm quite hopeful that there is some life left in there. So I'm just going to do the same with this, rake away the excess mulch, because this was almost 2 foot under with mulch, and I'm going to then give it some hot water. Hopefully that will come into life pretty soon. So that's about it for this section of the video. I'm now going to fast forward a few weeks and show you the growth with the slightly warm weather and the hot water treatment, and we'll see how nicely they start to come back into growth, because that's always a concern with these. Although it looks like they've all survived, until we get some good strong growth in them, I won't know 100% if they are definitely going to come back, and if they're going to come back with healthy strong growth, or if it's going to be distorted and maybe some of the inner sections have gone rotten. But we'll find out in a few weeks' time. And this should be looking a lot better by then. So it's now 2.5 months later, and as you can see, there's been a fantastic amount of growth from some of the plants. Now, it was a very tricky 2.5 months. It's been incredibly windy the last few months, and some of the bananas have really suffered. In fact, there's one banana which has grown 5 leaves, and every new leaf that came out was ripped off within 1 week of opening. So that one's almost died. I've actually transplanted it. Now, the reason I've moved that one is because it's one of my sikkimensis bananas, and they were all grown from seed, and they all grew slightly different because they had slightly different genetics, because they were seed grown. And with that one, it had very long petioles on the leaves. So I can show you an example. This one here, you can see where the leaf comes out from the main stem. There's quite a long bit of stem. The same with this one here. Well, that bit of stem was about twice as long on this other variety of Musa sikkimensis that I had, and every time the wind came, the leaves would get ripped off. Now these ones have actually lost 2 or 3 leaves themselves, these other 2 Musa sikkimensis plants, but they've kept enough leaves that they've kept growing, whereas the other one really just suffered and started to die. So I'll show you what that one looks like now, but before I show you that, this is what I've replaced it with, which is a seed-grown type of, I think, a Musa sikkimensis called Daz Giant. This is supposed to be a similar level of hardiness, maybe slightly larger leaves, so it'll be interesting to see how that does. That's a new one for this year. And this is the Musa sikkimensis that I took out with the longer petioles. As you can see, all the leaves have been broken on it. These were all the leaves it grew this year. they all just snapped off and shredded, so they've really not done well, and it's just got weaker and weaker because every new leaf is put out, it's just died before it's been able to get any photosynthesis. And this is the last leaf, which has kind of lost energy and starting to die back. And even the young pop out the bottom is also dying back. So I think I might lose this. I will see what happens. Maybe if we get some calm weather and there's enough leaf surface, it might recover, but I'm a bit worried that it's still rolled up. The growth is starting to slow, so this is probably not going to open. Without this being open, there's not enough surface for photosynthesis, so I think this plant unfortunately probably will die. But that's why I planted lots of sikkimensis plants. I want to see which banana is the hardiest, and I've also grown lots of different other varieties of banana. The idea is I find out the one that's best suited to my climate and I stick with those ones, and the ones that aren't most suited I either give away to friends or family, or they just die because they don't like our climate. So most of the other ones, as I say, did okay. There was one, which was the smaller one down here, which actually, the stem actually didn't look too bad in the last video update. That one completely rotted off and died, so I've replaced that with another seed-grown variety this year. Again, it's supposed to be a sikkimensis type banana, but this one's called Helen's Hybrid. And this one is supposed to have really nice purple colour underneath the leaves, you can see that there. And the other thing that makes this stand out from the other sikkimensis is you get this kind of waxy bloom on the stem there, which is a nice kind of blue colour. That does rub off if you touch it, but it has this nice kind of glaucous blue colour on the stem. This isn't showing it too well because it has been so windy, the leaves have been rubbing against it and it's kind of come off in places. But it is showing quite nicely in some of the newer growth, and if we have some calmer weather later in the summer, that should look quite good. So that was a replacement, as I say, for the previous one. The reason being that one actually, although the stem looked okay at the beginning, the stem actually completely rotted off. And this is what is left of that Musa sikkimensis. So the original stem was in the middle here. That completely rotted off and snapped. This is now a small pup which has come up from the side. So the plant is a bit weaker, it's a bit stunted, but it is starting to regrow. So maybe this type of Musa sikkimensis is less hardy than the others. It's a little bit hard to tell because that Musa sikkimensis was in a more contained, insulated box with less ventilation. So maybe it got too wet and humid and it rotted off over the winter, and that's the reason why it's died. So I will try growing this for another year, see how it does. But this Musa sikkimensis was always a bit smaller, a bit more of a dwarf variety, so I'm not super happy with the growth form of this. So if this doesn't make it, I'm not too worried, or I might even put this in another garden somewhere, because at the moment this isn't my favourite form. But of the other two sikkimensis plants, these are looking really good. This one is a little bit more wind damage. It's not looking like it's doing as well. But the one at the back, that's definitely my favourite so far. I'll just see if I can get a better angle and show you the leaves better. So this one, as you can see, has very upright leaves. The leaves are much longer, quite large leaves as well. What's also quite nice is a lot of the stem has grown and a lot of the old dead stem has fallen off, so the stem's looking nice and clean now. The rest of this dead material will probably fall off soon. It'll have a nice clean green stem. The leaves themselves, although they're quite long, I was a bit worried with the length of them, they would be snapped off. And as you can see, there is one hanging down there that snapped off previously, so this has already lost a few leaves to the wind. But although they're quite long leaves, they do seem quite tough, so this one is growing quite nicely. Quite happy with that one. As I say, this one as well is looking pretty good. This one though, the baby is actually really healthy, really strong growth coming up on that, big leaves as well. And one of the nice things with this one is it's a bit like the Helen's Hybrid. It has a really nice kind of purple colour underneath. All the sikkimensis have it to a degree, but some of them have it more than others. But this one has that really nice kind of purple colour, so this is also a really nice variety. The leaves on this one tend to be a bit wider and a bit shorter than the leaves on this Musa sikkimensis. As you can especially see that with the younger growth there of that leaf. So this is doing well, sending up a nice pop. This one's also sending up pops, but they're just very weak at the moment. I think most of the growth is still focused on the top half. And both of these have lost so many leaves over the summer so far with the wind that they're a little bit weak. But we've had a heat wave last weekend where we had about 20 odd degrees, and this weekend it's supposed to be about 26-28 degrees Celsius, which is a lot hotter than the 18 that we normally get here in Scotland. So it'll be interesting to see how these do. They should really perk up and hopefully put on a decent amount of growth. And the rest of the spring wasn't too bad. We did have some slight late frosts. It wasn't particularly bad, the frost, and when they did come, the plants were still quite wrapped up with the leaves. They didn't really have their growth on yet, so they didn't get damaged. The main problem this year, as I say, has been the wind, which has been almost relentless week after week. It gusts up to 50 miles an hour. So I'll show you the other bananas now. That was all the sikkimensis ones and the new varieties that I'm growing this year. So in the back here we have the Musa basjoo. I don't think this has lost a single leaf this year. I don't think it's because it's more sheltered. It is more sheltered now because this Ensete banana's got enormous, but I think it's because it's just the variety. So the Musa basjoo is the one I always expected to do best in my climate because it's more hardy at winter time, although in the summertime I still don't know if I think sikkimensis might have to grow better over the summer than basjoo in my climate, because sikkimensis maybe it's used to cooler conditions in the summer, whereas this is used to slightly warmer conditions in the summer, although it can take a bit more frost in the winter time. So this is doing really well. I've actually already separated the largest pup, so there's 3 remaining, possibly 4 if you count the really small one right at the back, around about there. And so this is doing well. As I say, the other pup was really quite large. That's now been separated. I'll probably keep that aside, maybe plant it somewhere else. But this is doing well. Quite a lot of leaf damage. I'll probably remove this ugly leaf soon because it's not doing much, but although the leaves have been shredded and damaged, they haven't been snapped off, so this has done much better with the strong winds. And another plant that isn't a banana, but I mentioned in the previous video, is the tree Dahlia here. This never came back, unfortunately. It kept growing new shoots. Every 2 or 3 days there would be a new shoot that would come up, but as soon as it appeared, within 12 hours or so of me first seeing it, it would just be cut off by something. Something's been nibbling it, I don't know what it is, but it just gets cut down every time, so that's kind of lost energy now. I think this will die off, unfortunately, but I have got cuttings from this from last summer, so I'll keep those cuttings alive and I'll probably plant the cuttings out next summer, so I'll have my tree Dahlia again. So now I'll go on and talk about my Ensete ventricosum plants. The rest of the tropical bed, there's lots of other interesting plants, but this is really a banana update in this video, so I will talk about them later on. But what I will mention is all of the Hedychiums came through fine, so the hardy gingers, you can see there's a few coming up here and a few at the end. A bit of variance in how well they did. This one is Telstar 4, the 2 on the right were the ones that kept in the ground, the 2 on the left were the ones that overwintered indoors, and they've grown up just fine. The other ginger is the Hedychium wardii, which has done fantastic. In fact, this is the first flowers I've had and they smell absolutely fantastic, really amazing scent. Now, although this one has actually grown much better outside for me in the summertime, especially last summer, this did much better than the Telstar 4. It seems like the winter hardiness, it really didn't do that well. It did survive the winter, but it just hasn't really grown until the last month or so. So all the growth you see now is the plant I overwintered, and all this new growth you can see is all from the plant I overwintered. So you can see how much it's sprouting. This is just really 2 stems, and it's got another 4 shoots coming up, which are much bigger than the previous ones. So that's doing really well. It's been in slow growth, not complete dormancy over winter, and it's shooting up now. But this was just a very small division of the main tubers. Most of the tubers, probably something like 80%, was left in the ground, and all that's come up is this one small shoot from the original tubers. I did check, most of them were fine. They were a little bit damaged. You can see them down here. They're quite close to the surface, but they're all still quite hard. But it's just put up this one shoot. It's now the middle of July and there's almost no growth at all. So what I'll do next year is I will keep these inside so they won't go fully dormant. It seems that although these do well in my cool climate over the summer and they grow quite well, it's getting out of dormancy that it struggles with. And if it's going to be this late coming out of dormancy, I'm going to have barely any growth over the summer. So next year I'll be definitely digging this up, keeping it growing over the winter, and then just planting it out every year. So I'll show you my Ensete ventricosums now. These have been fantastic with the wind. I don't think they've lost any leaves. They have had some wind damage with the leaves being shredded a bit, but generally the leaves are much tougher on these, and the plants have done really well. As you saw earlier on in the video, the leaves are really quite small and stunted, such as these ones here. But once the plant got its roots down, it's really starting to size up now, and it's almost as big as it was at the end of last summer now. You can see the stem is a bit smaller, so this is the old stem, and the new stem inside is definitely a bit narrower, and some of the old stem is starting to die back. But the leaves now are probably on par with how big they were last year, and it's only the middle of July. It's got so much leaf mass now that's going to have lots of area for absorbing sunlight. It's going to put on some really rapid growth, and so for the next month or two, whilst we've still got some good growing conditions, this is going to size up really nicely. Same with my other one as well. They're going to grow really big, and it'll be interesting to see how large they get this year. I'll show you a picture of how these looked at this time last year, just to give you an indication of how much more of the growing season is left, and how the beginning of the season is quite slow for my Ensetes, and it's towards the end that they really start to take off once they get their roots established and they've got all that leaf mass for collecting all that solar energy. So this is my other Ensete ventricosum. As you can see, it's not looking quite as good. The reason being, this is a much more exposed site. This is my front garden. The wind really comes down from the south and the west over that direction. Even though there's a hedge there, it just barrels down down. The 50-mile-an-hour wind gusts were really quite damaging for this. I don't think we lost any leaves, but as you can see, some of them were really badly shredded. The plant was a little bit stressed as well. You can see there's another leaf that's a bit shredded there. Also, the ground here isn't quite as rich. I've got this as a rose bed and a bedding border, so the soil is very rich, but not as rich as my tropical garden bed. And just the extra exposed site, I think it struggled a bit with the cooler weather at the beginning of the year. But as you can see, it's doing particularly well now. We're getting some really nice large leaves on the plant. It's starting to take off. You can see that this trunk is much more than last year, so you can see the thickness of last year's trunk. It's all dying back, and you got this new kind of stem in the middle, or trunk, starting to regrow. So it's going to be a bit smaller, the stem, but by the end of summer it will be bigger again. And this one last year did tend to have bigger leaves than the other one. You can see already we're getting some really big wide leaves, absolutely enormous. I also quite like this one because it has such a nice red stripe, a bit more prominent than the other one, and it has that nice kind of glaucous colour. In fact, you can probably see that a bit better on some of the younger leaves here. We've got that lovely kind of glaucous waxy coating and that really nice red stripe. So this is quite a nice looking Ensete ventricosum. It'll be interesting to see how it does. As I say, it's just starting to get going. Doesn't have as many leaves, but it's a much sunnier site this, so once the weather warms up and we have calmer weather, this one might actually do better than the other one if it needs that sunlight. If it's more to do with the ground conditions, then maybe the other one will grow better, but it'll be interesting to see how they do. I'm expecting these to get really quite large by the end of the summer. So that's all for now. I'm quite happy with how the bananas have overwintered. My first year overwintering them, -6 wasn't too hard for them last year, but I did have them well insulated, so that certainly helped. Musa basjoo, as I said previously, wasn't really insulated, it was just mulched. So I'm quite happy with how they've done. I'll give you guys an update at the end of the summer and show you how they're doing, and I'll also give you an update in a few weeks time, probably just a general tour of my tropical garden to show you all the other plants, because there's lots of other interesting plants I have growing here and quite a few new additions. So that's all for this video update. I'll see you guys in a few weeks or months time when I have another tropical garden update. That's all for the banana plants.